Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, BNews Director Rich Hosford. This month we're taking a deep dive into Burlington's history and a leap forward to see what could happen in the near future to help preserve the past. We'll start with a discussion with two people well known among history buffs, Historical Commission member and host of BCAT's show All History is Local, Michael Trudeau, and Historical Society President Mary Nolte. We had a wide-ranging talk about the roles of the two organizations and the importance of historical preservation in general. Then we'll take a look at a hot topic in town, the imminent teardown of one of Burlington's oldest houses, the Simons House at 121 Lexington Street. I'll talk with three people trying to save the house about its history, where things stand right now, and what might be possible in terms of its preservation. Finally, we'll talk to a proponent of Burlington's adoption of the Community Preservation Act, a state law that allows towns to collect property taxes that are partially matched by state funds for local projects in a variety of areas, including historical preservation. But first we'll start with Mike Trudeau and Mary Nolte and our talk about historical preservation. I'm now joined with two people who are going to talk about historic preservation in Burlington, sort of in general, give us the big picture. I'm joined now by Mary Nolte and Mike Trudeau, Mary of the Historical Commission and Society, and Mike to the Historical Commission, correct? Mm-hmm. Thank you both for coming on. And maybe we could start just a quick update or a quick explanation as to how you kind of got involved. And
I would like to do that.
Yeah.
I was in real estate many years, and I think of all the houses I passed and went into and never thought of history. And then when I worked at 124 Bedford Street, which is the Nathan Simons house, mm-hmm. and did open houses, and Mr. Fogelberg used to come in, and he showed me where the builder's initials were carved in the rafters, and I started reading literature, and that's how I got started in being interested in history. So I joined the Historical Society, and I've been in the society for about 9 years.
So it's actually seeing something physical related to the past.
Yeah, even now, I mean, for instance, stone walls.
Right, all the old farmers' walls.
Mike did a thing on snow, but when I was in Europe, my family's from England, I was amazed at the stone walls built by the Romans. So therefore, I started looking. In fact, yesterday, I was on Stony Brook Road mm-hmm. At someone's house that I'd never been to before, and I was amazed at all the stone walls we have right here in Burlington. I think Burlington's a great town.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And Mike, how'd you get kind of going on local history?
Well, local history, I mean, I've always been interested in history, but it frightens me to say 19 years ago, there was the bicentennial of the founding of Burlington, and one of the events was the Vietnam Veterans Moving Wall Memorial, which came to town. And I am a Vietnam veteran, and I became involved in that. And after that, my wife pointed out that there was a Burlington Historical Society, which I joined at that time, and there were openings for the Burlington Historical Commission, which I applied for and was accepted. And I've been with the commission and the society ever since. But the local history is very fascinating.
Well, so you mentioned, and both of you mentioned, the society and the commission. So what should people who maybe don't know about the difference between the two and what roles each has?
The society started way back when the West School, so the West School wouldn't be torn down, and some wonderful people in Burlington, Mr. Cassasser and Mr. Arsenault, and many people all banded together and saved money. They had the school children donating money, and local people all donating carpentry, electrical, and to save that school. And that's how it started. Then the Historical Society was formed. It then sold the West School to the town, and then the town started the commission, And the commission is in charge of the West School and all the other buildings. The Historical Society, we try to educate the people, and anybody can be in the society. You don't have to be appointed like in the commission, but in fact next month we're having a local person, Mr. Gallagher, Phil Gallagher.
Oh, wow.
He's
Our
going.
anchor.
He's going to be in our September program, doing a program on Benjamin Franklin, I believe.
Well, people who know BCAT will know Phil Gallagher.
That's
since
right.
he's
That's why I
quite a
mentioned.
regular
I
here.
knew that you would mention it. But we have a lot of good historical programs, and love to get new members.
Yes, you do one every month, right? A different person comes
Yes.
in and does,
Yeah.
you know, some kind of local history angle, or
That's
or
right.
talks about their lives, depending on
Yeah.
who they are.
Yeah. But we learn about the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and so many things that you take for granted that you forget about. And then when you get interested in it, you say, gee, I forgot that.
Right.
And you want to look into it more.
And what's more the role, Mike, of the Historical Commission then?
The commission actually has a two-pronged purpose. One is education. We take the third graders in on historical tours every year as part of their curriculum. And our other purpose is historical preservation. We operate the museum on the corner of Bedford and Cambridge Street, and we try to preserve the historical buildings here in town.
And talk about some of the notable successes that the commission's had, as far as what properties that people, you know, can go visit that, you know, are sort of like under the purview of the commission.
Right. The commission operates two buildings, the museum and the West School. The one of the successes of preservation is Marion Tavern, Grandview Farm. That was saved with a lot of help from the selectmen, from town meeting, from concerned citizens, and on and on. It was a tremendous effort to save that property. We've had failures in, for example, the Prouty House on Prouty Road. We lost that a couple of years ago. And we have the problem with 121 Lexington Street, which you did a news report of just a week or two ago.
And that will be part of the discussion of this overall hour show, of course, where we're talking about, yes, the Simon's house. Mary, you talked about, you know, you got involved in history because you were able to see some, you know.
I physically was
physically
there in the
there.
home, and
And I
I
think that
started
makes it-
thinking, my goodness, is this old?
Right.
And I wanted to know who lived there before them, etc. But a lot of the houses now, a lot of people don't want you to broadcast the fact that their house is of historical nature. You
Oh,
know,
really?
if a person loves history, like if I had a historical house, I'd be very proud because I'm interested. So getting people interested in history is important.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. Is, you know, I think a lot of people would have that same reaction.
Yeah,
You actually see something.
You have to know
you can hold
something before you'll love it.
So talk about the importance of, you know, saving these old sites, saving artifacts from them, and how that's different than just having a description in a book or some photos.
Right. Well, it's just like in the museum. I don't know if you've been in recently, but anybody who's not been into the museum recently, it's fabulous. It's got a lot of new things, and now they're doing a lot of electrical and wall changing, and so it'll be more inviting to the public. And there's little things when they have the children come in on the certain days that the third graders come in. They love seeing the old toasters and the old tools.
Oh, sure.
And playing with things, the old dolls. Today I was with Mike and we saw that baby carriage. And as old as it looked decrepit. There was still a place you could pull out and it would become a high chair with little wood wheels. And, you know, it just makes you think how people were very smart then, even though they didn't have the plastics and the equipment that we have now.
And Mike, talk about how, you know, that trying to preserve that connection really helps when you're trying to, you know, inspire other people to kind of get more involved in local history, to get you know, more interested in learning about, you know, the past that's all around them.
Your description of touching things, of actually holding them in your hands, instead of just seeing a picture is very apt.
Yeah.
The tactile feel of touching something really does connect you to the people of the past. When I can hold up something that looks something like a fly swatter to the kids, and I say, "What is this?" And they say, "I don't know." And you say, "It's a toaster. It's a bread toaster." And they have to start to think about how people were able to operate before electricity,
Sure.
before there was indoor plumbing, before there was anything, how life existed in this town, because this is a relatively old town. This is colonial America, after all. It is was a tiny village for most of its history, but it still has its roots right back to what's called the Great Migration of the Puritans. It goes that far back.
Wow. And so, I know obviously it's a passion for you. What do you think is the importance? This could be to either one of you of knowing the history around you. Why should somebody who looks at Burlington and sees the mall, sees Third Ave or the district, or some of these newer things? What's the importance of kind of grasping on and having a knowledge of the old?
It's amazing to me, first of all, how many people don't really know. And as you're talking about the children, they're telling their parents. Do you know when we became an entity in our own? We're part of Woburn. Do you remember this? And I've spoken to parents, and they'll tell me about the things the kid, it impresses them. So there is some other way besides children to get the word out. Now that museum is great, but there's no parking. So we could go on and talk about the planning of our town. Our town is great, and I love Burlington, but they did not plan ahead. They wouldn't have put in a station here and a condo here and smudged the museum right in between.
Sure.
And the West School, that would have had parking place. Instead, there's a split level there. So those kind of things we have to overcome and try to get around it, because you can't change that. And that's what we're going to try to do.
So I think what I'm hearing is that you believe there needs to be more of a priority placed in Burlington on not only preserving the places but making them accessible to the public.
Yeah, to some you can't right now. You can't change that. But sometimes people don't understand how much we care, and even about the house that's coming down. It's very sad for us, and it's going to instigate a feeling of what can we do so this doesn't happen again. And the wheels are turning, and Mr. Cohen's going to talk to you about that.
Yes. So through the commission, what kind of ability or what kind of resources does it have to enact preservation activities or actions?
For the structures, the buildings?
The buildings, yeah.
The only tool that we have at our disposal is what's called a 6-month demolition delay. If a building over 100 years old comes up for demolition, a contractor or a developer puts in a request for a demolition permit, then the building department contacts us. And if we determine this building has historical, cultural significance or architectural significance, then we can delay that demolition for 6 months and try to find an alternative to demolition. That's it. That is our only power, if you will. And most of the time, this simply annoys the contractors and does nothing. Because actually, by the time we get to a point of a demolition delay, it's already too late to save a building.
Why is that?
Because by that time it's been left, it has been, for example, the building that is under discussion most of all now, 121 Lexington, this has been neglected for a couple of decades now. It's been abandoned for 8 years, and it has just fallen into such disrepair that it would be almost impossible to restore it or renovate it at this point. It has tremendous amounts of dry rot. It has mold, mildew. It is in really tough shape. The time to preserve a building, the time to save it, is before it gets to that stage. And unfortunately for most homeowners, the cost of upkeep for a colonial era building, a real colonial era building, as opposed to a colonial revival, is astronomical.
It is.
They just can't afford it.
And do you think the town should do more? I mean, we have, like you said, the Grandview Marion Tavern that the town put a lot of money into. Do you think the town should take more of an active role in identifying these houses before they fall into this state?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
As I said, the time to do it is before they get to that stage. I was in contact with the Billerica Historical Society on a point, and pointing out this one building. Their president got back to me and was saying that she'd read the article in the Billerica Patch, and she just couldn't believe that we didn't have what's called CPA money, or Community Preservation Act.
Yeah, which we will talk about later in the show.
I know.
Exactly. Or the businesses that won't contribute to the upkeep of the historical property. And as I said, Burlington was a tiny village. There's very little to begin with, and everything we lose is very precious. And I think the only thing we have now, we have no carrots. We only have a little stick to try to get our point across. And we need more of an incentive for people to preserve their building so it doesn't get to us to begin with.
It's all going back to square one. Get to know it, care about it. Yeah.
Right. So it's first
And
of all,
money.
Yeah. Well, money is the
Money
thing.
is
So,
the thing.
so the commission doesn't
We,
gets like what is it? The line item is
We
like
have
10,000.
10,000 a year, and that was after a 500% increase only a few years ago.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that something along the lines of either a low-cost loan, an outright grant for historical preservation, perhaps a property tax rebate, something financial to incentivize people to maintain this property rather than let it go. I mean, I have notes taken from the Burlington Master Plan, which says over and over again how important historical preservation is, but has nothing actually
Yeah.
concrete to say about it. And one of the buildings they note as being a prime property here in town is called the John Wynn House, also known as the Hens and Chickens Tavern. And they pointed that as a success, but we almost lost that building
yeah.
a year or so ago because the former owner could not afford upkeep, was foreclosed. The new owners asked us for financial help. We had none to give, and I keep worrying about the future of that building. And that sits on the site of the first building of Burlington, what was called the original John Wynn House, which was a log cabin built around 1640.
Oh,
So
wow.
before the Woburn Charter was even signed. So this is of extreme historical significance. And if the owners decided to sell to a developer, I'm afraid there would be almost nothing we could do about it.
So would the idea be that the town would have a certain reserve or some sort of mechanism so that if somebody was going to sell one of these historic properties, that at least the town would have a chance to say, oh, well,
That's what-
we want to at least temporarily buy it, make sure that it
Right.
stays,
Yeah.
We had first
in its
refusal.
condition.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
first
We had first
refusal.
refusal. If the CPA were passed and that funding mechanism was put in place. But as of now, if we were to try to preserve the building in question, that would take our entire budget for the next 100 years.
But you know,
It's
Mike, the
impossible.
best part of it is from all bad comes good. Because as much as we hate to lose that house, look at all the publicity and all of a sudden all these people that want to save it. And that starts a new feeling that we're talking about, the importance of keeping history. So I think that's going to be better. In fact, at the last planning board, Mr. Raymond and Mr. Impember are both longtime Burlington guys, and they're talking about it and talked about, something has to be done, something besides the delay.
So in your view,
So that's good.
well, it is good.
The town talking about it.
If people are seeing, the increase in publicity, or they're
Oh, a lot.
if they watch this
It's
show,
wonderful, yeah.
what do you recommend if they have never been part of, anything like this before, but they are suddenly have that sort of fire? underneath them, what can they do? Where
It
can they go?
amazes me what people are calling about it. And it's great in a way, because those are the people that should join the commission and the society that, that are starting to get more interested in history.
Okay, the commission
se.
is an appointed body.
Right.
The Board of Selectmen appoint the members, but we do hold open meetings.
That's right.
Anyone is, the public is invited to attend at any time.
Yeah.
And if anyone has anything to say at one of our meetings, they will be heard.
And another thing, Mike, is a lot of people, the sadness part of this Lexington Street coming down is they thought that we should be keeping it. And now I hope they understand that we try in our way, but we're limited.
Right.
Just by the delay. And so as you go on with your programs, that's got to change. And I think people realize that now.
I don't want to just throw out the meetings and not have people. So when are the meetings? Where are they held?
Okay, the society meetings are on the first Thursday of the month. Right now with the
September.
the location right now is changing because of work being done.
Yeah.
But we were able to use the Grandview. We loved
Right.
it.
But normally you're in the Murray Kelly wing
Yes,
of the
yes.
Human
Yes.
Resources
Right.
building. Or,
Yes.
And the commission meets on the third Wednesday of the month at Grandview
At what time?
at 7 o'clock.
All right. So third Thursday?
Third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday, excuse me.
And first
we're-
Thursday.
Third
and again,
Wednesday at
we're-
7 o'clock.
We're adjourned for the summer, so we'll
Okay.
be getting back together in September unless something comes up and we call a special meeting, because we can do that at any time. We just have to publicize it publicly 48 hours in advance, because it is, again, a town body and it is open meeting, so we must publicize it to begin with.
And I know the society has a website,
Yes, we do.
so people can find more information there.
Yes, we put our meetings on and what's happening, and Facebook too.
Okay. So there's
Yeah.
ways, Facebook, they can get in the discussion,
Yep,
get the voices heard, maybe ask some
Yes.
questions
yeah,
about what they're interested in.
yep.
All right, very good.
I always copy your things. You do such great things.
Well,
You
thanks.
do, I think BCAT's wonderful.
Well,
The
we-
way you brought, teaching the public, or, it's more open. The
Yeah.
news is all open, that's the word I mean, and that's good.
well, we definitely try to be a resource of information for our residents. And with that, I want to thank you for coming on and being a resource of information for residents.
Well, thank you for
Appreciate
inviting
you
me.
both, Mike and
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks. We go next to my discussion with three people working on the preservation of the historic Simon's House: Historical Commission members Rob Costa and Kathy Horton, and Historical Society member Andrea Namoda. Now I have three people with me who are going to talk about sort of a big topic in town, and that is the situation and the possible history and future of the Simon's House. I'm joined by Historical Commission and Society member Kathy Horton, Historical Society and Commission member Rob Casa, and Historical Society member Andrea Namoda. Thank you all for coming in and talking about this subject that I think has quite recently become sort of a point of interest for a lot of people in town.
Well, thank you
Thanks
for having us.
as you say.
So let's just sort of start a little bit at the beginning. A little history lesson, and I got the perfect people for that. Who is Jonathan Simons, and how does he figure in the history of Burlington?
Very important.
Me?
Or either one of you.
All right,
Well,
so
Jonathan Simons was known because he's so important to our history because he was a Minuteman, and he belonged to the militia of Joshua Walker, who at the time it was still Woburn, but his house was downtown, and his son's house, he had built it. And his militia was very well known, and Jonathan Simons belonged to it, and he was one of the members that went to the Lexington and Concord on April 19th, 1775. He was included in that militia. He was also important because he was a deacon of the Second Parish Meeting House, which is still there. As
people
the
today,
Yes, yes.
The UCC.
Still very popular, yep, it is. You want to add some to that?
okay. The Simons family dates well
Way
into this area's history. The first Simons was William, I believe, settled in Woburn in the 1650s, and built houses there. Burlington, as Kathy mentioned, was part of Woburn until 1799. 1730, though, we separated as a separate parish. And, there was a long line of Simonses down to the present day, and our chief benefactor, Marshall Simons, was related to distantly related to Jonathan. Yeah. And so when the house was built, Jonathan was living on Lexington Street in the house of James Simons, and it's now known as the Captain Rice House, Big Red House on South Bedford Street in Lexington. And in 1781, the street.
Street of Lexington Street.
Yeah.
It's all good.
It's all good.
And so the house was built for him in 1781, when Burlington was still part of Woburn. And as Kathy mentioned, at the age of 22, he was a member of Joshua Walker's 3rd Company under the command of Woburn militiamen, and they got the alarm on April 19th and marched to Lexington and conquered. Probably missed the actual battle at Lexington, but went further into the frontier and fought in the Battle of the Bloody Angle and fought in the Battle of Fisk Hill. And then later he served, Andrea remembers, march to Albany, or was it?
Clackersville, New York. It's 213 miles.
Right, he was
So
part
far
of that.
afield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, he spent some time in the militia, then came back to Burlington, Woburn, 2nd Parish, and, married a Phoebe Cummings, who is connected to the famous Cummings name in this area today, the developer and the, Phoebe, and they had, I believe, 6 children. Andrea, was it 6?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I believe.
But Jonathan Jr. was the firstborn, and he was, Jonathan also played a significant role in town history. Just wanted to give the vitals. Jonathan Simons was born in 1752 and passed in 1807. You can find his headstone near Phoebe's in the 2nd Parish burial ground.
Right.
So,
and he lived to see the incorporation of Burlington,
yes,
which is nice.
and became was elected one of the first selectmen. He was also elected as assessor, school committee member.
So a lot of the positions
Very
that we
important.
still have
Right.
today and are
It is.
still institutions
So
here
he
in
had
town.
quite a list of what
Yeah.
he did to contribute to the history of Burlington.
Right. And his son as well. His son, Jonathan Jr., helped save the 2nd Parish Meeting House in the 1840s when they wanted to tear it down and build something new. He and others worked together to put a new roof on the building and preserve that 1732 structure, which is a first period dwelling. And
that was with monies from his own pocket. So Jonathan Simons Jr. took it upon himself to take money from his own pocket
Right.
in order to preserve something that was of great significance, and today still stands in Burlington, and I believe it was built in 1732.
So,
Yeah.
so even back then, people had a sense that the history was something to preserve, and these buildings that we've had and continue to use are something
Very
that
true.
I think that's
Yeah.
such an excellent
It is,
point
yeah.
because they were resourceful. Not everything had to be torn down and rebuilt in a bigger, better fashion. They, did a lot of remodeling, I guess like some of us do today. But I do believe there was a very strong interest in preservation and history in an earlier time.
Right. History saving earlier history. Talk a little bit about the house, that's up for discussion right now. What's its history? What parts of it are from what eras? Because I know it's been sort of modified over time.
It is.
So if people go and they drive by, what are they looking at? What are they seeing? And if they went inside, what would they see?
Oh, especially now, yeah.
Now, as you drive by Lexington now, it is a terribly sad sight driving down Lexington Street. Just before the Heritage Baptist Church, you look and you see a very forlorn building with a big red X on it. The house was built, as I said, in 1781, It was a federal-style building, early federal, and it had beautiful front door pediments. It had beautiful Rumford, it still has Rumford fireplaces and mantels, and extremely fine feather edge paneling in the main room, which you just, you know, it's all dilapidated. I mean, it's all, the paint's crumbling. It's, you know, it was whitewashed and then it's crumbling now, but it's very significant paneling. When you descend into the basement, you see the immense fieldstones used in creating the foundation, and also the enormous, which is still very structurally sound, I think, chimney support. Yeah. You know, the chimney stand with fine brickwork and you know, a big arch. But you also see rotting structural beams, infestation of all manner. But
I'm sorry. I would just like to add something when you're. I'd like to add that when you look at the house, there are so many beautiful homes in Burlington that we can compare the house to. So if one were to have a vision as to the beauty that can be restored to this house, it's definitely possible. So we have some other homes, very few, limited, that we could compare, but also when we look at some of the new modernized homes, some of them actually replicate the style of house throughout Burlington and in other surrounding communities. So it's a very, I think in my opinion, like classic kind of style home that if it was given the chance to be restored, it would be of great beauty and such a marvel here in town, because not only of its structurally what it looks like, but also because of its beautiful history that it has.
And the main house itself is the most historic part. The first 2 floors, I know the floors were a lot of the very wide pine planks.
Still present.
Yes, they're still there. Yeah. And as Rob said, the fireplaces are still there. And the beautiful Rumford fireplaces. The section that was added on after was added on towards the back, and that is a separate apartment.
Right.
And that was added on in the 1930s, so that is not as historically significant as the main 2-floor house is. And that's the one, of course, that has the X on it, which breaks my heart. I lived in that house for 27 years, but I lived in the section that was built in the 30s towards the back. But of course, I did enter the other house because my landlord lived there, and also another teacher lived there that was an art teacher here at the high school. Her name was Priscilla Kilgore, and she lived on the first floor, and both areas were beautifully historic. Both the second floor where the landlord lived and the first floor where Priscilla lived. The staircase going up was beautiful. As Rob said, the pediment at the entrance was gorgeous. So, I mean, I have been in there since. It is very disappointing, but as all of us said, we don't lose hope. I don't feel like it's hopeless to think maybe somehow, some way, we can find somebody to help us to help restore it. I know that it was sold in 2004, and the new families that had it until about 2011, and since 2011, I believe it's been emptied since then. So it's been about 7 years that nobody's been living in there. It was taken over by the bank, and it's on a good-sized piece of land. It's almost an acre. It's 0.81 parts of an acre. So again, it just was a beautiful house. I hate to see anything happen to it. It did have a good-sized lot. There were 3 garages in the back that nobody had to see people, you know, coming in and out, because it was nicely hidden away. Anyway, it's a beautiful historic house.
There's also a feel when you enter into the home that is unlike any other home that I've entered, unless it's another historical home. It's just it's a feeling that you're in a place where somebody over 200 years ago had walked. Somebody over 200 years ago had called this home and sat by these fireplaces, and someone who took part in American history that actually helped to, you know, create and form our nation. So
to continue with the history of the house,
Why?
In the 1930s, it was revamped, redone. I'm sorry, let's go back to the 1830s. Changes were made to the house in the 1830s by Ishmael Monroe, who lives in that Captain Rice house that I mentioned earlier, the big red on Lexington.
Right down the street.
Yep, right down the street. And they were related because, they were related in some way. So he made structural changes. Probably at that time they added this granite facing on the stone foundation, which again takes away its original integrity. And then in the 1930s, owners during the architectural period of colonial revival took place, they probably took the original front door pediment out and made additional changes. So the only hope, if those changes were not made, that house could have probably been eligible for placement on the National Register of Historic Places, because it was recommended that, I don't know that it was recommended because of the changes that had gone on over those years. So it has been, the chimney was also redone.
Okay.
The top of the chimney. Yeah.
So because it was not eligible as that designation, I think that could in part be one of the factors that brings us to where we are today, which I would have introduced before the segment, but we can talk about it. Right now it's slated to be torn down, and there's a proposal for three family condominium to be put there.
Yes.
To talk about, in the lead up, I know there was the Historical Commission put a hold on demolition, but that runs out, it's my understanding, next month, correct?
Couple of weeks.
Early
in July.
That's our only
So in this
power.
interim time, what kind of other options were explored? I know, Andrea, you talked a little bit.
Could I just mention one thing historically?
Sure.
And that's, we also wanted to mention Leonard Milliken, who also lived in the house in the early 1900s. His mother, Margaret, had bought it, and he went to the First World War. He was in it in France, and he was killed in July 29th of 1918. And he lived in that house. Also, what do you call it? The building there.
American Legion.
The American Legion. Thank you. I blanked for a second there. The American Legion was named after Leonard Milliken, and also Mackenzie, and Mr. Mackenzie, who was also lost in that war too.
So a lot of history tied.
A lot of
A lot of
history.
history, yeah.
And so you've got not only the Simons, but if you move forward a little bit, then you've also got Leonard Milliken, who was from Burlington.
So in December, the commission had a meeting that involved neighbors. Andrea had contacted people from the Masonic Lodge, people from the American Legion, and commission members were there. And there was a debate, and the commission voted to place a 6-month demolition delay on the house. And that passed. And in that time, the commission and history-minded people are given an opportunity to try to find solutions to save the house. And as we said, that demolition delay is up. But Andrea did so much work trying to contact people regarding the possible moving of the house or financing its renovation. So she has all kinds of stuff to tell you.
So what were some of the
Great
things
job.
that you looked into?
So when I started to do some reading and some research about the history of the home, I found different connections, and I started with contacting the Masonic Lodge, because here in Burlington, the Masonic Lodge is the Simons Lodge. So there was a connection with the name Simons. And then because Leonard had been an occupant of the home, I also wanted to reach out and contact the American Legion. But at that point, I did not know the connection between the naming of the American Legion and the picture of Leonard that actually is in the Legion Hall. So I was really impressed and surprised, and so there was another connection. And I received a very warm, favorable response from both the Simons Masonic Lodge and from the American Legion here in Burlington. And there were discussions as to moving the moving the historical part of the home to the lot at the American Legion. So we began to look into how would we be able to move this and the costs and what the route would be and all the different particulars about it. So I was able to contact Granite State Movers, and they was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Stan Wild, who was wonderful. He came out, he assessed the property and deemed it suitable to move. He said, yes, we could definitely move this.
Okay.
Because that was a question, whether or not we could have it moved.
And then it became a question of to where, right?
And then,
And the cost of the move.
That's
Sure.
the
yeah,
big
it was,
thing.
but it wasn't as extravagant as people were projecting. We had $300,000 and this and that. And when we got down to actually move the home, it was in the low 40s. But once you move the home, you would need a foundation. So the next piece would be, how would we have a foundation? And then the idea was maybe if they weren't able to do anything with it right away, maybe just like moth it and tighten it up so no further destruction would happen to it. So then that wasn't something that was going to be feasible. And so I thought of the Minuteman Sports Club here in town. It's right off of Francis Wyman Road. So I tried to get in touch with their people, and also one of the gentlemen from the Simons Masonic Lodge, Mr. Greg Irvine, had tried also to contact the Minuteman Sports Club to see if this home could be moved, and it would be a beautiful clubhouse for these, for the people that
The Minuteman
are
Club,
there.
though, is in Billerica, but it still would be a nice property.
Yeah, it would be situated with close to the Francis Wyman House, which is
That would
another
be
historical home, and then there's another Wyman property on the other side of the Minuteman Sports Club's property. So it just seemed like it would be really neat that we had talked about maybe some reenactments and maybe a parade and things that would ideas that would spark the community's interest and give some credence to what Burlington's role actually was in the American Revolution, and how Burlington has, deep historical significance, as well as Lexington and Concord and Woburn and the surrounding communities.
Right, what everybody thinks about when you think colonial or revolutionary history. You think Lexington,
Right.
Concord, obviously,
Yeah.
Bedford, but Burlington just as much there with
Absolutely.
figures like
Oh, yeah.
the Simons.
Let me just add to that note. John Hancock and Samuel Adams spent some period of time in the house known as the Sewell House, that is now long gone, burned in a fire in 1897, as an example to what you said. They were rousted out of their Lexington Hancock Clark house and fled to deep into Woburn Second Parish and spent the night in the home of Abigail Jones, which was later known as the Sewell House. They were about to, this is an interesting story, I always think.
It is.
They were about to sit down to a meal of an early salmon and peas when again they were notified they needed to move. So it was then that they fled, led by a black slave who was owned by the minister in town at that time. His name is Cuff.
Yep.
And they fled to what we know now as the Amos Wyman homestead. There's no home there now, it's just a boulder with a plaque. But again, that's just one example of how people in Burlington need to learn more about their history. And we equate with the people of Lexington in a lot of ways, and
Absolutely.
Bedford and Concord, and they truly, truly care deeply for their history and support it. So just one example.
So I hate to cut off history at any discussion, but we are getting the notice from the control room that we're already past our time.
Oh dear.
So I just want to touch on a couple of the important current things that are happening right now. So right now there's a plan for a monument to be put on the site that, as part of the development, using some of the parts of the home or some of the materials, correct?
We're hoping
If
that
we
monument,
can't save it.
and
Right.
we're hoping that monument is included in the plans.
It
for,
is. It's
for
on
that.
the plans.
It's on the plans that they have
Yeah.
recently submitted, so that would be
And
great.
it calls for, very near the sidewalk of Lexington, a 3-foot wide stone wall. Doesn't say how long it is, but a 3-foot wide stone wall, utilizing materials that I had spoken about earlier the stonework, the granite perhaps,
Granite,
and
yeah.
brickwork.
Yep.
And we
From
are
the
in-
house original.
Yeah, and we're in the process as a committee to try to design a fitting memorial and decide what to include in its
And
in the
what to
plaques,
say, yeah.
what to say. So
What to
at
say
that
about
point,
it,
we're
yeah.
we've been looking. Andrea has gone to various towns and examined different historical monuments,
And you have.
and
To
I
make
have.
something
Yeah.
appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, there's always the hope that it could be
saved.
saved, and we will. We
Keep
had
that.
a news story on it recently where we talked about some of the hopes and stuff. So I think we'll have to leave it there. But I appreciate you guys coming in, sharing the history of the house, the hopes for it, and the letting everyone know sort of where things stand at this time. I think it's a good piece of information for the community, and I appreciate you
See,
taking your
once-
time.
Once you get us going, see, we just keep going and going
But
and going.
we have deep gratitude for you.
Thank you so much.
Rich, as well as BCAT, to air these programs. I mean, and it's a way to inform and keep history alive, inform the community and keep history alive. So, bravo.
Oh, well,
Thank
thank you.
you.
We do what we can to get the information out there. So
Thank
thank
you
you very
so
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Finally, I spoke to Conservation Commission Chairman Larry Cohen about the Community Preservation Act, what it is, how it works, and how it can be used to fund a variety of projects in Burlington, from open space to recreation, affordable housing, and historic preservation. Now I'm joined by one of the leading voices pushing for Burlington to adopt what is known as the Community Preservation Act. And we're here now with Conservation Commission Chairman Larry Cohen. Larry, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
So, just for people who are unfamiliar, we'll start off with the broad strokes. What is the act in question?
Well, the Community Preservation Act is a state program. It's a state program to help communities do outdoor recreation projects, affordable housing, historic preservation projects, and open space, acquire open space. This is a program that actually is a joint venture by the town producing some funds and the state matching those funds.
And how does it work? What does it mean for a town if it were to adopt the act?
Well, the community preservation law allows for the town, for example, in this case Burlington, to levy a surcharge on the existing taxes. It could be anywhere from 1 to 3%. And then when the town collects those taxes as a surcharge on whatever taxes you pay, then the state will give you a certain percentage match as sort of an incentive for doing this.
So we have a certain charge on residential or on commercial taxes. The state will match some of that. Now, what does the state match, and how might that be changing in the near future?
Okay, well, the state, when this law was created back around 2000, the state created it, and a few towns jumped into the pool, and there was enough money in the state fund to compensate towns, so that if you collected $2, then the state would reimburse you another $2, and so it was a 100% match. As the more and more communities saw this as a good thing to do, then it amounted to the percentage match dropped because available funds were being spread over more towns. Right now, the available funds it varies depending on how much you collect, but it could be between 11 and 14% reimbursement. It has been recognized that it has become so popular that that there is a proposed law at the State House. It is now working its way through both the Senate and House. The House has not done anything with it yet, but the Senate version of the budget bill that is now being negotiated actually has a provision in to raise the recording fees, the real estate recording fees at the Registry of Deeds, and that's the source of funds.
Right.
If that's the case, we could get somewhere between a 30 and 50% match if they come to agreement on it.
So then, the more the town puts in, the more it will receive from the state to do these type of projects.
Well, actually, the way it works is if you are a town that has implemented a 3% surcharge, then what happens is you are awarded what is called the full match. So those towns that actually collect a 3% surcharge on the existing taxes would get a 14% reimbursement match every November. For those towns that decided to collect a lower percentage of surcharge, they would get about 80% of that. It rounds up to about 11.2, 11.3%.
Now, of course, people will hear this and they'll think, oh, another tax. And there's always concern about those residents who are sort of already having a difficult time making ends meet. There are exceptions that are possible, right? Or exemptions, actually.
Yes, there is a few exemptions. The first is that if you are a senior, and certainly you're on fixed income, presumably, and you are in what is defined by HUD as low income, then you can simply ask for a waiver, as long as that's what our voters voted for. If our voters vote to put that waiver possibility in what they vote for, then all you would do is when you get your annual tax bill at a certain time, whenever the bill comes out, there'd be a little form. Typically what towns do is there's a little form in there, and if you qualify for that low income exemption, then you simply sign the form and the surcharge would not apply. There's also another surcharge if you happen to be a senior and you are in both not only the low income bracket, but what is defined as the medium income or modest income bracket. Mm-hmm. It goes up a ways from the low income. You also have the ability, if it's in what the town votes for, to again ask for that waiver. So let's be clear. What it is, for example, if you were someone who has a typical bill of maybe a modest house and you have $5,000 in taxes, then your bill surcharge for the year at 1% would be $50.
Right.
Right.
So it's not a huge amount, but the idea is that it builds up across the town, and then there's these funds available to do different types of projects.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say that, $50 is not a lot, but if you are legitimately on low income and you're on a fixed income from Social Security or some other source, it's $50 could be significant. And so it's a way we as a town can be sensitive to those people that might have a tough time paying for that.
Right. Now, it's my understanding that there are a couple categories that these funds sort of need to address. Can you go over those?
Yeah, these are for 4 specific categories. There is open space, historic preservation, affordable housing, and outdoor recreation facilities, including even playground equipment, for example. You can use those funds. The state mandates that when you collect the funds, you set up a reserve account that 10% is for historic preservation, 10% is for recreation, and 10% is for affordable housing purposes. And the other 70% is what is called undesignated. It could be applied to each. It's to ensure that at least some modest amount of money is spent and reserved specifically for each of those categories.
All right, understood. And if the town were to adopt this, who kind of controls those funds? Who oversees this? Is it town meeting, or would there be a separate committee set up, or how does that work?
It's actually twofold. First, if the town does vote to adopt this at a ballot initiative, then what happens is a Burlington Community Preservation Committee is created. And their role is, there's about 2 or 3 things that they do. The first major role is they do an assessment of what the needs are for the community. So the folks at the Historical Society and the Historical Commission would get to input into that study, and that committee would get to articulate what those needs are. The same thing would be true for the Recreation Department, Conservation Commission being the custodians of much of the open space, and the Housing Commission would again have the same thing. And that study would be done by this commission. the commission is made up of representatives mandated from each of those groups, including one more from the planning department. So the commission has that representation and that connection to these various groups. Now, what happens is the second responsibility of the Community Preservation Committee in Burlington would be to accept proposals. They can do it once a year, or they can do it on a rolling basis to evaluate proposals and so forth. And then once a year, they would hold even a public hearing. And then once a year, they would then go to town meeting. They would go to town meeting and tell the town meeting members, here is the project that we would like to do this year. They don't have to do a project this year, but if they decide they have enough funds and want to do a project this year, they do it. Now, town meeting, if that aligns with the thinking of what town meeting says, well, here is, we understand the reasons why you're doing it. We understand why you're suggesting this particular project, and then town meeting essentially gets to vote. The Preservation Committee only recommends, and if a different direction on the part of what town meeting would like to see, then the Preservation Committee could go back and come back to a subsequent town meeting and propose something different.
And I think you sort of entered this, but not, in your previous explanation, but the funds don't need to be used every year. They can also be kind of built up, and then if there's something
Rich,
bigger.
that's an interesting point. You get your matching funds from the state irregardless of whether you're doing a project that particular year. It's not tied to you doing the project.
Right.
It's tied to you actually collecting the funds.
Doing the collection.
Right.
So when you think about, or actually we can just sort of maybe take a look outward for a second. I know other communities in the area have adopted the act. What are some of the things that they've been able to do with the funds?
Well, I use our neighbor to the west, Town of Bedford, as an example. And the reason is because they have been into the community preservation, as a Community Preservation Act community for many years now. And they have done, I have a little list here, they've done new athletic fields and tennis courts with the funds. They have done a new play structure at the town center. They have done historic preservation of gravestones and historical stone walls. They have used it for the design for the extension of the Minuteman bike path. They have even hired a grant writer for the Bedford Housing Trust. So, for example, if the Historical Commission was looking to hire a consultant, let's say that they thought that they would like to propose a bylaw to the community, they could get help from an expert consultant, and they could use these funds to hire the consultant to help them write that bylaw, for example, if they were interested.
So the technical detail.
It's a technical detail. Bedford has procured the services of a housing consultant for affordable housing. They have used it for the design of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems at their town hall. There must have been a historical significance to it.
Sure.
And they have, and related to conservation, they've done a feasibility study for installing a boardwalk that spans a large wetland. So I picked those out as being very notable. In town, of course, one of the more recent projects, which is the restoration of Marion Tavern.
Right.
The funds could have been used for that. Now, it's important to point out that there may not be enough funds to do a project like that. Many towns have also supplemented funds from one of three sources. They can supplement with their own funds instead of this specialized fund. I mean, in conjunction with the specialized fund. They could also apply for grants. There is a number of, particularly in the recreation area, there are grants that you can get through the state or the federal government that could supplement the community preservation funds. Or some towns for really large projects have actually gone out for bonding and supplement the funds by floating a bond, a municipal bond.
So borrowing. Now, are there grants that are more likely to be granted to a town that has adopted this act versus a town that hasn't? Do you know?
Grants?
Yeah, you mentioned grants. I mean, is this way of when a municipality is applying for a grant, you kind of it's good to show what the town has done itself to help.
Well, the advantage, of course, is when you're applying for grants, they liked if it's a large project, they'd like to see that you have figured out a way to leverage the project through other sources. So, for example, We were successful at this one, but the Francis Wyman playground, for example, not the Francis Wyman, the playground over here off of Bedford Street.
Simon Park?
No,
No.
for the one further down. But whatever, I forget the name at the moment. But the point is that was a school at one point, and it was transferred into a playground, and we received a park grant to help do that conversion. If we had these funds available, the Community Preservation Committee in Burlington could possibly have voted to recommend to town meeting that we supplement those funds, if it was necessary, with the funds from these collections.
Right, okay. So what I'm understanding is, yes, people pay a little bit more, or some more on taxes, but it opens up funds from the state that the town wouldn't otherwise get, and then it's possible makes it easier to get grants later down the road
now,
for projects.
There's one other consideration that is also useful, is that if you are a small homeowner, many towns will have the ability, can opt the provision that you have the first $100,000 in taxable value is exempt. And so you can do that as well. So essentially if you have a small home, and it's, I'll say, one of the small ranch houses and so forth, if we adopt that, everybody gets the first 100,000. That would mean also that you would not pay for 1/3 of that levy on that size home.
Right, okay, so it's a way of reducing the burden on. Now, does that just apply to residents, or?
No, it applies to residences and businesses.
Okay. But just so be clear, just because people might ask, businesses are part of this. This is all commercial, all property.
Business is part of it. Now, there are exemptions you can have to have exemptions for a certain portion of the value for Class 3 and Class 4 industrial retail properties. You could do that as well. Usually that's very rare. Most towns do not implement that particular exemption.
Gotcha. Now, when you were sort of doing this research or coming up with this proposal, did you have ideas in mind, like specific, or maybe kind of in general ideas of what Burlington might use these funds for? Have you heard from other people suggestions of what, it's great to have this program and be able to use it in these 4 areas, but are there certain ideas or things that maybe people watching this might latch on to?
Well, I can talk from the point of view of conservation, because I think about if we had these funds, wouldn't it be great? Of course.
And open space is a big
open
interest
space
for people
but
here.
Of course, as we, for example, when I think about open space, I think about the fact that the town just voted to move towards the MWRA at some point in the future. The wetland resource area will be not producing our water anymore. At that point, we have a really valuable natural resource. And I start thinking about boardwalks and bird watching stations and things of that nature that could allow us to actually communicate with that resource area, in a meaningful way. And so that's one area. When I think about recreation, I'm thinking about, wouldn't it be nice if the Bike Path Committee had the possibility of using these funds, to essentially come up with a meaningful bike path, in a segregated area or something like that. We could use it for that. I don't quite know as much about what the plans are of what the wish list is for, say, the historical preservation, but I know that there are a number of properties in town that they wish they had funds for to help either renovate or preserve those properties.
So multitude of different types of projects that could be possibly benefit from this.
That's correct.
And I guess the last thing is just, you mentioned a ballot initiative. So what is the process to get Burlington to adopt this act?
Well, we're just getting started. The Conservation Commission has agreed to take the lead. And we are moving forward by assembling what I would say is an ad hoc committee looking for interested parties to help be the people that would lead the effort to promote it to various parts of our community and get the word out as to what this is, that it's certainly more than just a tax. And we've been to the Board of Selectmen, and we've been to the Recreation Commission. We got full support from the Recreation Commission, and Kevin Sullivan has agreed to be on this ad hoc committee. The next stop is the Historical Commission and the Housing Commission, and then we're going to look for other people in the community representing various groups who think this is a good idea in these 4 areas. The important thing to remember about this is that the Community Preservation Act gives the people of Burlington control over what is done. We have control through our town meeting members to accept which projects are done and where the emphasis of these projects are. For the business community, you have to remember that we're in competition with towns like Newton and Lexington and Waltham. And if you look on the websites for some of the large office holders and so forth, they advertise the amenities in Burlington. They advertise the fact that there's a landlocked forest, that there are bike trails, that there are walking paths and so forth. And we have this large open space as a resource area. And those towns that I've mentioned have in fact adopted the Community Preservation Act and have not suffered, it appears, one iota.
Right.
So it turns out that in order to remain attractive to business, potential people who are looking to set up their businesses here, they look at Burlington as a place to live and work, not just a place to go and leave immediately. So the quality of the environment would be substantially enhanced by the kinds of projects that this money would favor.
And what's the process for it to be passed?
The process is that at some point, probably within the 9 months to a year time frame, we will get before a town meeting and make a presentation, at which time they will have the opportunity to vote to put it as a ballot initiative before the voters. And then once it is voted in and it is written up appropriately, we would have at a town election or a state election, they would get to vote and we would become a Community Preservation Act community.
Very good. And if somebody sees this and they want to get involved, as you suggested people, might, is there a way to funnel their enthusiasm?
Absolutely. All they have to do is call the Conservation Commission and John Keeley will get the message to us, and I'll be happy to immediately get right in contact with them.
Very good. All right. Well, I appreciate you for coming on, explaining this kind of complicated act and sort of like laying it out for us and our viewers. So I appreciate it very much.
You're entirely welcome. I was glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. I'd like to thank my guests, Mary Nolte, Mike Trudeau, Rob Costa, Kathy Horton, Andrea Namoda, and Larry Cohen. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. For BNews In Depth, I'm your host, Rich Hosford, and we'll see you next time.